Okay, this video we're going to work through creating the spacer plate, and it's a pretty simple part, but I just want to get you started with a couple of good tips and ideas on working through Inventor, since this will be new to most of you. You've been watching the CAD learning videos, but we're going to have a lot of homemade videos on this class too. So when you start Inventor, let's work under the default project. And of course, I've got a lot of them here because I've been doing a lot of work, but go to over here in projects, go to default and check that. And that's going to just tie everything tied into one project until we start doing drawings. When we start doing drawings, then that will change, okay? So we're going to create a part, and this part is in inches. So a couple of things here. We can click new part here. We can come up here and hit the pull down and choose what we want, or we can just click the button there. And you may have more templates installed. For some reason, I only have English. There we go. Okay, so I got English US. But you want to use an inch template file when you're doing inch drawings, and you want to use a metric file, millimeters, when you're doing a metric drawing. So if you start up here, you want to be sure and play down through there. And if you just click new, it may default back to whatever the last part or drawing or whatever it was that you created, whatever template you used. So I would highly recommend, and I'm going to close that down, that you always come up here and start from your templates so you know you're using the right thing. And this one is an inch part, so we're going to go create. Okay, now if you look at the drawing in Blackboard, the image there, it's got the shape and the dimensions. And the difference about Inventor is we don't have to draw it to the exact size when we're drawing our sketches. We draw it and then we use constraints and dimensions to give us the correct size and shape that we want. All right, so now let's look at our menu bar up here. Your panels may look a little different. If you've got a larger screen than what I've got, you may have more panels. If you've got a smaller screen, you may have fewer panels. If something is not showing up and you need it, you come over here and right click in an empty area and go show panels, and that will show you what is turned on and what is turned off. Okay. And pretty much everything, you know, from here up is kind of a normal kind of a stuff that we're going to be working with. Later, we'll get into some of these other things in other classes. One thing you could turn on measure, and that provides your measure tools for you right there in a panel, so it makes it a little easier to get to. All right, so we're going to go start a 2D sketch, and this particular one, I want it to be on the front plane. Now, if we expand origins over here, the folder, that shows us all our planes and our axes. Now we can click on the plane we want here in our drawing space, or we could click on it over in the browser, either one, but we want it to be on the front plane because that's how this object is oriented. It just makes sense. Now, once you start a sketch, keep an eye on your view cube and make sure that it's turned right side up. Sometimes when you start, especially with a metric template, or if you start drawing on one of the other planes, it may flip that box upside down, or it may flip it. So you always want to check that. Okay, so we're going to start this, and when you create a part, you always want something about that part tied to the origin, to the 0, point. It depends on the shape of the part. Sometimes it's best to put it in the center of the part if it's a symmetrical part. If it's not symmetrical, then a corner or something about the part needs to be at the origin. It will make it easier in the future. So we're going to start our line command, and I'm going to come down here until I get a green dot at the 0, point, and I'm going to click once with my left mouse button, and I'm going to start dragging out. Now you should have what's known as the heads-up display showing. It should be owned by default, which is the two boxes there that has the length and the angle. Okay, so if I drag off, I'm at an angle, but if I go vertical, I get the little pop-up there of a vertical constraint that's applied, and that's what I want. Okay, now my measurement, you can type in the exact measurement you want, but in this video, I'm going to make it just close to the right size. And this thing is like 6.5 inches tall, so I'm just gonna go there. Now I'll zoom back in a little bit more, and I'm gonna come over horizontal and click again, and then come down at an angle, no specific angle. Click again and just keep my line command going, and I'm going to come down vertically. Now you notice there it will constrain it to the midpoint of that other line. If that's what you want, great, but it is not what I want. So I'm going to continue down a little bit further, just making sure that I've got a vertical or in this case a parallel constraint. I'm going to click and come in and see now it gives me a perpendicular constraint. And then I'm going to come down with another perpendicular constraint to that x-axis and click, and I'm going to come back to my green dot and close that loop. And I'll press my escape button, and that finishes out the command. Now let's put in a circle, and if you look at the pull down, you've got 3 different options. In this case, I just want a circle center point, and so I'm just going to come in here and pop me a circle in and another circle. Now I've got my sketch, and it's roughly the correct shape and size. So now I'm going to apply dimensions. And in this case, I want to just place my dimensions, and then come back and correct them all. And so I'm going to place them kind of as they're shown in my drawing. I could edit these as I'm placing, but in this case, I want to just place them all first. And then I'm going to come back and edit them to get the correct size. Now I'm going to do this because I want you to see how when you change a dimension, it's going to affect things. Once you get comfortable with working in the program, you can edit those dimensions as you're placing them or as you're drawing. And I'll go from axes up to point. So I pick up the red dot. It gets the point there. And let's see, I've got 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2. Now I just need the diameters for my holes. Okay, so I've got all the dimensions placed. Now I hit the escape key a couple of times, and that exits out of that dimension command. Now I can come in and start editing my dimensions, and it'll change the shape of my object. And I recommend you start with the larger dimensions first, and then work your way to smaller dimensions, because this is going to affect the shape of your object. So I'm going to start down here, double click the numbers, and make that an 8. It's an 8.0. Now I can make this one the 2.5, and you can see how it's changing the shape of my object. And I'm I'm clicking the dimensions to make the edits, not clicking the actual line, because the line is there and it's constrained. Now, before I go through and finish this, I want you to notice here at the bottom, it says my drawing is fully constrained. That means I placed in all of my dimensions that are needed for this shape. And your sketches should always be fully constrained. It will prevent you from having problems in the future if you have to come back and edit that. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video and finish editing all my dimensions, and then I'll come back and we'll pick up with how to finish this thing out. All right, now I have finished dimensioning and resizing my my part. Okay, you can see like I said before, it tells me down here in the bottom that I'm fully constrained. I got all my dimensions in. Now I want to show you, let's see, is it F8? Oh, I forget, on my laptop I have to hit the function key. No, for some reason those function keys aren't working in here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. It was F8. There are function keys and shortcut keys in Inventor. Okay, what I wanted to turn on was the constraints. And so now I can see all of the constraints that were applied automatically in my part creation when I was creating the sketch. So all of the dots are constraints that join the endpoint of a line to the endpoint of a line. And then all the little gray or silver figures are what type of constraint, a geometric constraint. These are perpendicular, that's parallel, this one is vertical. We could do a horizontal constraint there. And these were applied automatically when we were doing the drawing. Later in the class, we get into how to apply them yourself manually so that you can force your drawing to do what you want it to do. But that's dealing with constraints. Okay, so now I go finish sketch. And I want to extrude, but let me zoom back out here. I want to go extrude. And sometimes it will select your profile automatically. Sometimes it doesn't, because we have multiple things going on here. So we'll go select profiles. And depending upon where your mouse ends up in here, depends on what type of a sketch you may get. So I want that profile right there. Okay, now distance and direction. This is the default. It brings the extrusion forward. That sends the extrusion to the back. This splits it evenly from your work plane that you created it on, or known as symmetrical. This one is asymmetric, meaning it could go one distance to the rear, a different distance to the front. Okay, depending upon the shape of your part, depends on how you want to extrude it. Okay, so we are going to stick with our default to the front, and it is 0.125. Double checking that, yes, 0.125 thick. And yeah, all that looks good. So I say, okay. And then it has extruded my part. There it is. And now I want to save it. And of course, you're going to have you need a folder created. I'm going to put a new one on my desktop because I have lots of different stuff going on here. And I'm going to create me a new folder here, 1105 2021. And now then I want you to save these things with your last name and then whatever the assignment name is. And then this one is spacer plate. Okay, and that's it. And then that is what you will submit into Blackboard when you turn in your assignment.